to 109 years in prison before his conviction was overturned. Earlier, Ellsberg served as a strategic analyst at the Rand Corporation and consultant to the Defense Department on the White House, specializing in problems of the command and control of nuclear weapons, nuclear war plans, and crisis decision-making. In addition to becoming a prominent opponent of the Vietnam War, Ellsberg has been a leading advocate for the complete elimination of nuclear weapons. His forthcoming memoir is tentatively titled America's Doomsday Machine, Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner. Daniel Ellsberg.
Hi. I see a lot of familiar faces. How many people have I seen out here before in previous years? Very good. How many have I not? Let's see. So newcomers. Okay. Jackie Gabasso just reminded me that we first met. I and she, we've been working together for a third of a century. We first met out here in this lot in 1979. That's 36 years ago. So we're still at it. They're still at it, so we're still at it. We got arrested that day. I expect to get arrested today, and it's a good crowd, it looks like, to get arrested with. I hope a lot of you will be with us. I was thinking that 70 years, I keep hearing 70 years, and I subtracted that from my 84 years. How many people here are as old or older than I am right now? Let me see. Fair number. I'd like to ask, that reminded me that I was 14 then. And those of you who just raised your hands, I saw about 15, I'd be interested afterwards, if you have time, to let me know what your memory is of the bomb when it first happened. And if any of you have, you might not, any have the same memory that I have very vividly, and I won't go into why I happen to have this, was graced with this memory, but that I felt very great dismay at this event and at Harry Truman's exuberant description of the greatest thing in history and the fact that God had given it to the U.S. Rather than the others, and how wonderful it was. Even though it did soon drop the war, I felt a very ominous thing had happened. See, there's the background to that, how I happened to feel that way. I wasn't alone. I've met a number of others here and there, all very isolated at the time from their fellow Americans who were only celebrating the fact that the war was ending. In fact, very quickly, anybody else here remember feeling much the same way I did at that time? I see several hands. I'd like to hear about that later. But of course, we were fed the line then and later, especially, how necessary it had been, how justified. My perception at that time, at 14, hasn't really ever changed, though I've studied the history very much. I've never been a pacifist. I was not one when I joined the Marines. I wasn't when I went to Vietnam later, meaning that I don't regard all killing in war as murder, necessarily. But a lot of killing in war is murder. And as Chelsea Manning showed with the video of people being shot down, point blanks, unarmed civilians, including, it turned out, a couple of children from a helicopter. And if you haven't seen that, I urge you to look it up on YouTube, Collateral Murder. You'll get it. He was very much criticized, and Julian Assange, who made it available, for using this provocative title, Collateral Murder, instead of damage. But to me, as a former Marine who taught laws of war, as a company commander, it was very obvious that what you were looking at in shooting down these unarmed civilians who were not posing any kind of threat, that was murder. The killing at Hiroshima was murder, mass murder. Terrorism, the killing of civilians, non-combatants for a political purpose or any other kind of purpose, terrorism, and mass murder. Nothing other. It should not have happened. It did not need to happen. It should never happen again. And yet, I turned down the chance to speak, actually, at a 40th anniversary reunion in Hiroshima, having been sent a air ticket to go and everything. I found I couldn't bring myself to speak to people at Hiroshima again. I'd been there twice before on this 40th anniversary with their cenotaph there, the epigraph saying, "Rest in peace, those who lie here. The crime shall not be repeated," sometimes translated as "the error shall not be repeated" for American ears, but the original Japanese was "the crime shall not be repeated." I couldn't say in good faith that I really felt the crime would not be repeated. It hasn't been in those terms for 70 years, and many people credit the nuclear weapons with that. They say, thanks to those, we haven't had a major all-out war, and it's because of that people have, we haven't had the war. So they're grateful to the weapons, just as so many Americans were grateful, our age and older, grateful to the bomb for saving their brothers and their uncles and their fathers from invading Japan in the false belief that that was the alternative. Okay, so people live with this gratitude. The problem is that that kind of peace, such as it was bought with a continuous building and modernizing and deploying of weapons that made it the possibility of mass murder ever present, and I mean from minute to minute, and especially, of course, in major crises like the Cuban Missile Crisis. The fact is that right now, 70 years later, right now, if you read the papers about Ukraine, you're looking at threats and possibilities and deployments of Russian and U.S. troops in the vicinity of Ukraine that confronts us with the possibility of fighting between Russians and U.S. troops in a way that has never happened, but has never been this close since the Cuban Missile Crisis 52 years ago, 53 years ago. We're facing, I think, and now this time both sides, then it was us. This side's both Putin and the U.S. are talking about the possible first use of nuclear weapons. And for the last 25 years, we've now known nuclear weapons used between the U.S. and Russia will cause, from the smoke of the burning cities on the target plans that I worked on, and are worked on in Russia, the smoke will be lofted to the stratosphere, as in Hiroshima, by a higher firestorm, but simultaneously, thousands of cities, pillars of smoke, that will join around the globe, blot out the sunlight sufficiently to kill harvests around the world, and condemn nearly the entire population of the world to death, the doomsday machine, the end. We've known that not at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, but for the last 25 years. And yet these threats go on. The threats go on, and they are threats of ending nearly all life. And I'm being very precise here. Physicists like Alan Roebuck says probably there will be some humans, we're so adaptable, left somewhere eating fish and mollusks in an island somewhere. There may be 1 million, maybe 10 million. Humans won't be totally extinct. Only the other 7 billion will be, along with the primates. And that's what they're talking about right now. We're at greater danger. That's outrageous. Is it worth doing everything we can to prolong the period before this human outrageous folly and criminality result in this kind of war? I'll bet that all over the world today, or all over this country, there are groups like this. Some smaller, I've been at smaller, and some larger. If it hadn't been for groups like this, we would have had the nuclear war earlier, as well as testing in the atmosphere and otherwise. There's a whole story on that. In 1969, it was the moratorium where people like this all over the country were gathered on October 15th, 1969, and led Nixon to abort his threats of initiating nuclear war in Vietnam. And we didn't know he was making those threats. We didn't know he was having that attitude. I want to end with a 2-minute exercise here, one to prepare and one other that some of you have heard me before. And it bears on the question of why we're doing this and why working without assurance that we will succeed in avoiding this extinction. There is no assurance. I cannot describe myself as having faith that we will avoid this. But we have a chance, And I want to indicate the importance of every moment, the 10 years we're buying with Iran deal out of another entry into the nuclear club, the importance of all that. The bomb is usually described, always almost, as having exploded at 8:15. When I was at Hiroshima, I noticed something odd. In all the museums and the illustrations of the bomb with artifacts from the bomb, there were watches that stopped when the bomb exploded. Very striking, all at the same time. They were all pretty accurate, it seemed, together. And they were not stopping at 8:15, they were stopping closer to 8:16. And that was odd to me. So I looked up the history of it, and I found that the bomb was dropped at 8:15 from the Enola Gay, but it took 43 seconds to fall. It was on a parachute to give the plane time to get away, and so it fell. People saw the plane, but they didn't notice too much the thing falling. They went around their daily business at 8:15 to 8:16. So I'm going to ask you, it only takes a minute here now, to close your eyes when I say so, and imagine yourself, Japanese, lying with your loved one in bed, let's say, in the morning, or at the breakfast table with your family, or walking to work through gardens, as people have described their last minute. At 8:15, all of these people were doomed. But they had 43 seconds in which to live on Earth with other people. Try that. Be there. I'll tell you when. Okay, now start. The bomb has dropped. Close your eyes and imagine yourself living in Hiroshima. Then. It was longer than you thought, wasn't it? Time for a baby to be conceived, or even born. Time to look at flowers, time to say goodbye to your child leaving for school, as many of them were. Time to live, an amazing amount of time. Every minute of that is precious. It's what we're threatening altogether, and we shouldn't be. But every minute like that, let alone 70 years or another 70 years, is precious to have with us these memories. Once, just before the May Day event, where we all got arrested in May Day in Washington in 1971, just before the Pentagon Papers, the movie Little Man with Dustin Hoffman had just come out, and I remember saying to people at this rally before we went to Washington, the Sioux have a saying which is repeated several times in the movie. Come, brothers, this is a good day to die. And I said, it's never really a good day to die, but this is a good day to get arrested. And that's today. Thank you for being here.